morning, good evening, good afternoon, hello from wherever you're coming from and whatever time it is. My name is Renza Scibilia. I'm here from Team dedoc, and I'm absolutely delighted that I get to host our doc talk tonight, this morning, whatever time it is. I will say it is 4 a.m. here in Melbourne, so I probably will be saying tonight, but I do understand that for most people it is not that time. Thank you so much to everybody joining us. This is going to be an absolutely fabulous event. It is all about diabetes data and connected devices, but in particular, how they affect the quality of life of people living with diabetes, because diabetes is about far more than numbers, it's far more than data, it's far more than devices as well. A very big thank you to our sponsors, to Lily for helping us make this event possible. We have got an absolutely stellar lineup of speakers that you are going to hear. Now, this isn't all about you sitting there though and not participating. We find that these events are best when they're interactive. And if you know anything that we do at dedoc, it is all about the community, nothing about us without us. So we want to hear from you throughout it. Please do ask questions, add comments, and we will bring those in to the conversation. And we're going to start off in just a moment with some questions that we're going to be asking you, because we want to get a sense of who is watching. There's a bit of icebreakers just to get things going before we bring on our first speaker. Before I do that, I do just want to quickly mention, I am in Melbourne. We've had some absolutely magical electric storms recently, so I might be a little bit glitchy, but I am here. And if anything happens, we've got some contingency plans, but I will just let you know that so that you don't think that I've rushed off to go back to bed, given the early hour. Okay, so let's get going. We're going to start with some questions. This isn't going to be hard. This is going to be a little bit of fun, actually. So let's start. Where is everybody? Where are you all? So as I said, I'm in Melbourne, which beautiful Wurundjeri land here in Australia. But we're really keen to know where people are. We know that with all of our dedoc events, we have people from all over the place and our voices coming in from everywhere. Special hello to our dedoc voices. Now, what you need to do for this, you need to go to menti.com, and then you need to add in the code, which is 6113 1031. You can see that at the top of the slide there. Hello from Switzerland, from Denmark. Oh, I feel like I'm doing Eurovision. This is really exciting. Where else have we got people? People coming in from the Netherlands. Absolutely fabulous. I'm not expecting to see too many people coming in from Australia. Seriously, I am sending you a gold star if you are. We've got some people coming in from Germany. I know that we've got speakers here who are from the US, so we really are everywhere. Some from France, wonderful. So keep adding those just so that we can see where people. Hello, we've got some people coming in from Pakistan, Berlin, Italy and Spain. Okay, so once again, we get to see that dedoc and the activities that we do, they are truly coming, involving people all over the world. I think that's one of the most incredible things about our little community here, is it truly is very much global. Oh, this is awesome. Okay, good. Let's, as much as I would like to sit here and do a bit of a travel show, because that would be awesome as well, let's move on and ask our next question, please. Okay. So which connected devices do you currently use to manage your diabetes? There are some choices there. Just curious to know, what is it that people are using? And I know that there are obviously lots of different choices, and sometimes they're not choices. We very much do recognise that as well. But if you're comfortable sharing information about that, please do, so that we can see. And what we're going to be hearing today is we're going to be hearing from people who are using, I guess, a variety of different devices. And as ever, what we're going to learn is that there is not one size that fits all when it comes to diabetes. Sometimes that is about choice, but obviously there are other factors as well. So if you've just joined, if you go to menti.com and then use the code 61131031, you can join our Menti conversation, which is just our little icebreaker at the beginning of this event. Okay, let's jump on to the next question, please. It's really interesting to see what people are saying there, but now we're interested to know which connected devices would you use if access and cost wasn't an issue? Because obviously that certainly is. Now, for some people, it will be exactly what it is that you're using now. I know that I'm really thrilled with what I am using, but for other people, it might be, actually, there are some things I would really like to use, but I simply can't. So as we see, we've got once again choices. Gosh, our open source community is as ever well represented. Um, and we have people using all different things, standalone CGM or Flash, pen and CGM. We know that there are so many choices that people make, but as I said, we also know that choice is not always necessarily, the deciding factor for people. Okay, let's move on to our last question, which is an open box, and you can actually contribute more than one answer here. How do you currently use your diabetes data? Is it just for you? Do you share it with people? Is it a conversation starter with your healthcare team? Is it a conversation starter with friends with diabetes? Do you post it on Twitter? Guilty. What is it that you do to actually get your data out there? Share with your boyfriend. Yep. I know that so many people do use it as, for that extra security, I guess. They share it with a loved one. Parents of kids are seeing their children's data, which is so reassuring to spot trends and change things. Yep, mostly for me to make adjustments. The data is so powerful if we know how to use it and we're using it for the way that works for us. And I'm really thrilled that we're going to be hearing about that today, about just exactly how it is that we can use data for good and to help us. So to assess insulin sensitivity, just with my healthcare professionals when I have an appointment, just for me. I'm a bit of a just for me as well, except for when I share things on Twitter. And I always love to see the variety of responses. I never wrote things down and don't like most apps. Yeah, fantastic. All right, let's just keep these coming in just for a moment. As I said, you can certainly add more for the doc on Facebook and Twitter. Yeah, I know. Always a good thing. Review trends. Okay. Oh gosh, I think that I sort of feel like we could have a 10-minute conversation about these, and we kind of will be actually, because we will have a panel discussion at the end with our speakers and with questions and comments that are coming in from people watching. Now, what you will see with our platform here is that you might see your comment or your question or your comment come across the bottom of the screen. We absolutely love having these sessions as interactive. I think that that's a really great way to bring the community in. So please feel free. I can see that there already are some comments, so thank you very much. Okay, well, my doctor doesn't really care for digital. Oh, that's an interesting point. We are going to have some conversations about how we use data with healthcare professionals. All right. Okay. I try to see it just as it is, data, not judgment. I think that's really fascinating and fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on. As I said, we could probably keep doing this, but I know that there is so much discussion to have. But let's move on and bring our first speaker on. I'm so delighted to welcome Andrea Limbourg to today, and she's just joining us. There you are, Andrea. Now, for anybody who has been following along with recent dedoc activities, you would have seen Andrea speaking at our dedoc symposium at EASD a couple of months ago, or last month, I think it was still. She's been an active member of the diabetes online community for as long as I have, actually, which is a long time. She's an incredible advocate, a wonderful supporter of other people with diabetes. She's coming to us from France. How are you this morning, Andrea?
I'm very well, thank you, this evening.
This evening.
Thank you,
Now, I'm so
Renza.
excited to hear your talk. It's about the burden of living with diabetes, and we're going to and focusing on devices and data in particular. And I think that that's one of the things that we do need to understand. All of the digital technologies and solutions are wonderful, but they do come with a little bit of burden. So I'm interested to hear your take on this and some tips and tricks as well. So thank you so much, and take it away.
Thank you, Renza. So for anyone who knows me, they're going to be thinking, why is Andrea talking about the burdens of diabetes technology? I'm usually one to adopt new diabetes tech pretty easily and very quickly. I've been using an insulin pump for 22 years. I've had a CGM for 13 years. I got those numbers on my watch 5, almost 6 years ago. And I've been using a DIY closed loop for 3.5 years when I finally got access to the right devices. So yes, I'm really excited by new diabetes technology, and I'm really lucky to be able to access the devices that I use. So there's no question for me that my life is better because I use certain technologies. But that doesn't mean that it's easy to live with this tech every day. So I'm willing to admit that for my own mental health, I minimize some of the burdens and focus on what tech can do for me. Just helps me kind of balance things in my own life. I'm sure, like many of you, I get a lot of my diabetes information online. In this era of social media, there's often a big buildup of anticipation when any new devices are going to be launched, even if you know that it might not be coming to your corner of the world for another few years. And if you've spent any time in the diabetes online community, on blogs 15 years ago, on Twitter and Facebook groups, and more recently on Instagram, it seems like everyone is talking about and everyone has the newest tech. And even offline, who hasn't gotten an email or even a newspaper clipping from some well-meaning relative saying that a teenager in their area now has an artificial pancreas that has, for all intents and purposes, according to the author, has cured his diabetes. Also, these days, companies' branding is bright and enticing, and they seem to promise that I can sail around the world solo, I can cross the Sahara Desert, I can climb Mount Everest with their products. Never mind the fact that I have no desire to do any of those things. But I've been told that these products will change my life. So let's say, for simplicity's sake, that the new tech is finally out where you live and that you have access to it. You finally get this thing that has promised to revolutionize your life, and you start to use it, and then reality sets in. It didn't take me long to compile a list of where things can get difficult from here, almost all of which I have experienced myself over the last 22 years or more. So there's the practical side, getting it to stick, which can end up being expensive when you have skin that adhesive doesn't want to stick to. Or there could be the other side of dealing with skin issues like rashes and burns because of the adhesive. You also need a place to put all the gear. There's no question that it's hard to pack light for a holiday when you need to double your diabetes gear for the number of days that you're going away. Some people can just throw a few pens in a bag, and some of us have to put boxes of pods or infusion sets, new sensors and transmitters, and that you still need to have that handful of pens since you need backups to your backups in case anything goes wrong. There's, of course, also the technical side, finding out how to put it on and how to use it. And not all education is created equally, and support for troubleshooting isn't always easy to access. How do I know that I have a bent cannula? What do I do when I realize it's bent, and how can I prevent it perhaps from getting bent the next time? I know I once used an insulin pump that had features that I had never seen before and had different names compared to other pumps that I had used. When I read the user manual, and I did read the user manual, it told me step by step how to set up those features, but at no point did it tell me what they were for and how they could help me manage my diabetes. And unfortunately, my pump trainer was of no help either for those things. So you have to be able to understand and use that data. So, and there, I know this is going to be talked about a little bit later in our evening, but I wanted to touch on how overwhelming it can be to go from just a few finger stick data points per day to the 288 CGM points every day with arrows and loud alarms that sometimes sound even when there's no action to take, so you don't really need something beeping at you. And other times when you're in the middle of a job interview or having an intimate moment with your spouse. I did say that I was speaking from experience. There's also the emotional side of living with this technology and the data. So diabetes has always been an invisible condition to the outside world, other than sort of the moment that you're taking your treatment. And suddenly there's a shift when a device makes diabetes visible and audible. You might have to deal with other people's perceptions as well of the technology. You know, people who are saying, I thought that now that you have a pump, your diabetes would be better. Doesn't it just take care of your blood sugars now? Of course, it's not that simple. There could also be some judgment or perceived judgment, I guess, from healthcare professionals, from people who follow your numbers, and even, I know, from myself. I've been given access to this amazing and expensive technology that is supposed to help me. But how is it that I've not been able to lower my A1C or increase my time in range or avoid the hypos? And so all of this can lead to feelings of distress or sadness or frustration. But I think the key is to not leave it at that, or maybe to never get there in the first place. The balance is in understanding that using technology is not always helpful, and we need to find strategies to help. So one of the best lines that I've ever heard about choosing diabetes treatments in general, whether it's technology or otherwise, is finding the right tech at the right time for each individual. And figuring out what is right for you and when happens with your medical team and by talking with other people with diabetes who are using these same devices. People who use technology need to be actively included in the decision process for what and when to use it. There needs to be open conversations about benefits of using technology, but also about the potential difficulties that it can cause and the fact that it can cause stress. And I think there also needs to be conversation about the solutions, the potential solutions to that stress. And I think a lot of healthcare professionals play down the downsides of using technology, because if you list all those potential stressors, it can be harder to convince people of the benefits. So there needs to be structured support available from healthcare teams. And of course, there's support available within the diabetes community. Healthcare professionals can also help their patients find peer support locally or online. And I think online peer support for me is one of the most important diabetes technologies that I use. And one thing that is so important, but that I rarely hear, is technology is not a one-way street. You can go back. You can take a break from using your CGM. You can go back to MDI from your pump. You can turn off the automated functions of your closed loop system and just use it as a regular pump. It's about finding the right tech at the right time for each individual and making sure that each person is using the tech and has access to technical and emotional support going forward. Thank you.
Oh, Andrea, thank you so much for setting the scene so perfectly for us for today. I think one of the points that really resonated there was the right device, the right time for the right person. And of course, and everything I say here comes with disclaimers that sometimes that choice may not be quite as broad and as wide for people, but it is still, finding the right device with the choices that are available. Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere, because we will be bringing you back on at the end. But thank you very, very much. I really love the way that you set that scene so perfectly. I think sometimes in the diabetes world, we do seem to think of things as, as technology as being all rainbows and unicorns. And it certainly is. It is so, so wonderful. And I'm thrilled that we have the advances that we have access to now, rather than what was available 50 years ago, 100 years ago when insulin was discovered, or even 25 years ago when I was diagnosed. But I do think we do need to recognize that it is a little bit of a double-edged sword sometimes. So thank you for doing that so eloquently. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and we're going to now move on. I am so excited to introduce a fellow Aussie. We have Jasmine Schipp joining us. Jasmine is from the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, the ACBRD. She is a PH candidate. However, she is far, far smarter than me, because she's in Copenhagen right now, so it is not 4:20 a.m. or whatever it is here. Hello, Jasmine. How are you? Welcome.
I'm good. How are you going, Renza?
Very, very well. I miss seeing your face in Melbourne, but I'm thrilled that we get to see it here today. Thank you very, very much for joining us. We've got Jasmine speaking about how diabetes data and connected devices impact quality of life. So the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research in Diabetes, and please do after this go and have a look at the work of the centre, looks at just that, the behavioural aspects of diabetes. And I'm very fortunate that I get to work with the team there on a number of different projects. But Jasmine, so thrilled to hear from you today. I'm going to step off screen and we're going to leave it to you and your slides now. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Renza. And we're also very fortunate to be working with you. So I'll be talking today about how diabetes data and connected devices can improve quality of life for people with diabetes. So what is quality of life? It's defined as a personal evaluation of how good or bad your life is. And it can be tricky to define and measure because it's subjective, which means that what you think makes your life good or bad can be very different to what I think makes my life good or bad. And as researchers, we're often interested in measuring diabetes-specific quality of life because we want to know how diabetes impacts on your quality of life. And we know from this research that, unfortunately, diabetes can often negatively impact quality of life. So some research conducted by my colleagues at the Australian Centre for Behavioural Research and Diabetes highlighted this. People spoke about how self-managing their diabetes is difficult, relentless, time-consuming, and it takes a lot of effort. For example, this woman said, it's a full life experience. It's not something you can just do and take a break from whenever you feel like it. It's there 24/7 and it's draining. So we know that diabetes is hard to manage. Ideally, we want to find devices and data that can make it easier. So I'm going to be using a case study that I think is one of the coolest examples of connected devices and diabetes data. And it's what my PhD focuses on, which is looping. So people who are looping are using self-built systems. So they were developed by people in the diabetes online community like Dana Lewis, who will be speaking later today. And they're connected devices because they connect your CGM with your pump, and they automate some decisions about insulin delivery based on an algorithm. And also, diabetes data can be visualized in a new way when people are looping. And in my PhD, we conducted 2 studies. So we asked people in Australia who are looping about their experiences using it, and then we measured quality of life and other outcomes in a worldwide survey. So first, I'll be talking about how diabetes data can improve quality of life for people who are looping. So when you're looping, people can have a system that looks like this, where they have all these great, easy to read visualizing graphs that can show things like current and predicted glucose levels, active insulin, insulin delivery, and active carbohydrates. And when data is presented in this really easy to understand way, people said that it helped them to understand themselves better, to understand their glucose levels and their diabetes better. For example, this person said, seeing that as a graph, I've never seen my diabetes in that way. I can better predict what's going to happen in the future, or I can better understand what's happening with my body, really. People also told us about how gaining this better understanding of their glucose levels and just how complicated and variable their diabetes was gave them some more compassion for themselves. They started to see that what Loop was doing in the background was really, really hard work, and it would have been impossible to do it themselves. For example, this person said, there's no way I could have been doing that myself. I wake up in the morning and I might have had 5 units of insulin overnight. You could never replicate that yourself. So we can see here in this example that data that's easy to understand, that's visualized in a way that's easy to read, can help people to understand themselves and their bodies better, and can help them to be more compassionate with themselves. Secondly, I'll talk a bit about how connected devices can improve quality of life in people who are looping. So a looping system creates connections between a CGM and an insulin pump, and it automates some decisions about insulin delivery using an algorithm. And this means that some of the decisions and some of the burden and effort of diabetes can be lessened. So for example, this person here was previously using a pump and a CGM separately, and then they started looping. They said, when I was just on a pump and CGM, I'll still be having to look at the CGM, see what my blood sugar is doing. If it was going up, I'd have to actively think about giving a correction or setting a temporary basal rate or whatever. But now the system's just doing it for me, so it's a lot less work. A lot less work and a lot less time. People told us that they got back an hour of their lives every day they would have usually spent managing their diabetes. And people also mentioned some other great benefits too. The people talked about things like being able to sleep through the night, or being less afraid of having a hypo, or being less worried about their diabetes. So when we conducted the worldwide survey, we wanted to measure all of these outcomes. So these are outcomes that are related to quality of life, so they're similar, but not exactly quality of life. So that in order to measure this, we had to give people a whole bunch of questionnaires. So we asked people about how well they were sleeping, how worried they were about their diabetes, how worried they were about hypos, how they were feeling overall, how they were feeling specifically about their diabetes, and how they were feeling about the treatment option they were currently using. So looping for the people who are looping, and then we also had a comparator group of people who were using standard care. We did this in a worldwide survey with over 450 loopers took part. And when we compared them to the control group, we saw that they had a better quality of life, but they also did better on all of these other measures too. So the reason we thought about including these measures was based on the interviews that we did and what people told us about how these devices were impacting on their daily lives. For example, people were sleeping better because their glucose levels were staying within target range overnight. For example, this person said to be able to sleep without waking up in the middle of the night low, without waking up high, it's just the quality of sleep would have to be the greatest asset that I found since I've started looping. People also talked about how if they were confident they were going to stay within these target range, they were less afraid of having hypos. For example, this person said that they had peace of mind around knowing that I won't die in my sleep or not be able to wake up and treat a hypo. People also told us about how looping helped them to lower their diabetes distress. And a big part of diabetes distress is worrying about the future, worrying about possible complications you might have down the track. And I think this quote from this woman in our study really powerfully sums us up about how she felt looping improved that. She said, I thought I might lose my toes and I might be in a wheelchair one day. And now I have more hope that I can be extending my quality of life as well as quantity so that I can hopefully just be a grandma. Whew. So in conclusion, in this example, we can see how data can help people to understand their diabetes better when the data is easy to understand. And it can help them to have more compassion for themselves when they start to really see for the first time just how complicated, just how variable their glucose levels are. And that it's not their fault if they were ever struggling before, because it's really, really, really hard work. Connected devices can also help to remove some burden and effort for people if it's helping to make some of the decisions or the calculations for them. And we also saw that devices and data can improve a range of different things in people's lives, such as how they were sleeping or how worried they were feeling. So this is really exciting because it shows that technology has the potential to be very beneficial and to improve quality of life. But technology is not accessible or affordable for all. So not everyone has a technology that they need or that they want to manage their diabetes. And technology is not a cure, like Andrea said, it's not a magic fix. It's still really hard work managing diabetes. And although technology might reduce some of the burden and effort, it doesn't make it fully go away. And furthermore, as Andrea spoke to as well, it can come with its own burdens and its own barriers and burdens, such as skin reactions to the adhesives, which Andrea spoke about. Finally, technology is not one size fits all. Everyone is different and everyone can choose to manage their diabetes differently. And as Andrea said, that can change from moment to moment. And next up, we'll be hearing from Amin on what options work for him when he's choosing to manage his diabetes. Despite technology, diabetes is still a really challenging condition to manage, but there are promising results showing that connected devices and data can really help make people's lives easier. I'd like to thank all of the participants who contributed to this work. We would not be able to do research without you, to my co-authors who helped out on these studies, and I'd also like to thank you all for your time and attention today. Cheers.
Thank you so, so much. I think that one of the things that is really important is that we do recognize just how hard diabetes can be. And you did that so beautifully. So thank you very, very much for that. I'll say the same thing as I said to Andrea, don't go too far away because we absolutely will be bringing you back because we have lots of questions coming in. And a reminder to people in the audience, please do ask questions. We will be getting to them in our panel discussion where we will be absolutely drilling our speakers and you have an opportunity to do that too. Thank you so much, Jasmine, and we will see you soon. All right, there are so many comments coming in, and I'm sort of skimming through them, and there's so many different comments from people. Once again, I would like to highlight that there is no one size fits all. We've heard that in both of our from both of our speakers so far, and I think we will continue to hear that as we go on. And we're going to hear that now. One of the things that we really wanted to do when we were putting together today's program was to make sure that we did hear from people with a variety of experiences. Not everybody is, wanting to use necessarily things that are high tech and the far end of technology, the technology spectrum. I'm going to bring on now Amin Zayani, who is going to share his stories. Amin is an incredible person in the diabetes community who I have been very fortunate to know for a number of years. He's an entrepreneur. He's incredibly smart. And I say that all the time. And I know that he does like it when I say that, but I genuinely do mean it. I know, Amin, I know. And he's going to talk about his experiences and what it is that he has chosen to use and why. So, Amin, take it away, please.
Yeah, so thank you for these kind words and thank you for having me. Thank you for having me here. I'm the guy who still uses insulin pens. Probably many of you know me as the guy who used to do MedAngel, so very obsessed about temperature and insulin and properly storing it and so on. I'm working on a new project in the same space, which you will probably hear about very soon. But today I'm here to talk about why I still use insulin pens. So I was born and raised in Tunisia, and I had my diabetes diagnosis 17 years ago. I started using syringes and vials, and then I moved to Germany 14 years ago and started to get one of the best possible cares for diabetes in the world. And so in my 16 years of living with diabetes, 17 years of living with diabetes, I had a few key moments. One of them was switching from syringes and vials to pens. Was an amazing moment. It was it hurt less. It was more convenient. I could just throw them in my bag and go with them anywhere. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. And one of the moments when I realized that insulin pens are a huge improvement over vials is one day a few years ago I had to take an injection because I ran out of needles and it hurt so much. So insulin pens was a big moment for me. The second moment for me was starting to use CGM. The first couple of weeks I started to use, it was a flash sensor, and then now I have CGM. I was like, whoa, this is what happens in my body when I do this or eat that, or when I'm stressed, or this is what happens at night. So it was a crazy moment. And I still use CGM and pens, even though I have access to any pump, any hybrid system, closed loop system, you name it. In fact, every time I go to my appointments, my doctor tries to convince me, and she says, you can get anyone. You can have this pump or that pump. Look how shiny they are. Look at this one. It doesn't have a tube. And I still prefer to use the pens. And I prefer to use the pens first because it's really practical and low tech. So anywhere I go, if I'm traveling for a long time or a short time, or if I'm leaving the house for just a couple of hours or a couple of days or weeks, all I need to take are the pens. So no infusion sets, no applicators, no tubing, no reservoirs, no batteries. I just need to take my pens and a couple of needles and I'm good. The second thing I like about them is that, I get to decide the amount of insulin I inject and when. So I'm still not comfortable with the idea of a machine giving me insulin. Something very psychological, very irrational. I know a closed loop system will do it much better than I can. And the third reason is because I just don't like the idea of having a tubing, like these Teflon tubes and catheters. And of course, I know there are tubeless pumps, but yeah, I really enjoy the simplicity, the versatility, the low tech aspect of pens. And I don't think I will switch to a pump anytime soon, although sometimes when I wake up and see what happens in my sleep and I see what others have in their sleep when they have these very modern pumps, I think, maybe it's the time to do it. Anyways, the third moment when I also felt kind of a change or an improvement with my diabetes care was when the first connected pens came out. So the first one that was announced and was available in Europe was announced in 2018. Couldn't get it until a couple of weeks ago. I was really excited. I thought, oh, this was going to be an inflection point like using a CGM was, but it turns out it wasn't. So the impact of using a connected pen for me is almost negligible. All I can see is logged doses. So I can see, oh, I took this week double the insulin I took last week. But it really didn't change much in my life. And I feel like there is really a lot to be done in terms of data and MDI, especially that most of the people who live with type 1 and type 2 diabetes in the world will never get access to pumps. Pumps are really expensive, and not everyone will get access to them. It's really funny. One time I met a doctor from Tunisia, and this was years ago, and he said, like, do you know how many people use a pump in Tunisia? I was like, no. He's like, that's 36, and I'm treating 4 of them. So when it's not reimbursed and when they're not available and when you can't have access to them, you really have the vials or the pens. I think the very vast majority of the world will not have access to the most modern connected solutions. And so I really feel like MDI should get more investment in terms of research and development, because that's really where the most impact will be. And even though most of the research and the development goes into the closed loop systems, I really feel like some of it should go to MDI. I was quite perplexed and confused. Why isn't this happening? And then I had a number of conversations with people who work on, let's say, looping with pens. And it turns out it's more difficult. It's harder to do the algorithms, let's say, that let you loop or that give you assistance with your decisions when you're using a long-acting and a short-acting insulin pen. And so I get that it's really, it's harder, even though it's counterintuitive. Like, how can it be harder? But yes, it is indeed harder. And so that's it. I just wanted to share my experience with you. I could have any pump, but I still choose to use pens, and that's pretty much it.
Thank you. I mean, your choice. I think that, your diabetes, your rules, your choice. I think that's really, really useful. Thank you so much for sharing your experience there. We have some really interesting comments here that I do just want to touch on, and we are showing some as well at the bottom here. But so great to see technology for pens developing for those using MDI. And I think that that's absolutely true. I feel that there's been so much advancement when it's come to pumps and to those technologies, but so many people are using pens. And so having access to devices and knowing that there is, more and more happening there is really useful and really, really important. There was another comment here from Tom. Thank you for sharing your real life, your lived experience. Connected pens are amazing. There's that comment there. Amazing for me, and are a bridge between disposable pens and pumps. I love my smart insulin pens. Oh, we love to hear those stories. Thank you so much. I mean, I've got a million questions that I want to ask you, but I'm going to do that later on. But I will remind everybody, please do add questions into the comments and we will get to them. And yes, absolutely great to see all angles of technology being looked at. And I think that that's what we really wanted to highlight again tonight was, along with that one size does not fit all, is that means that we need to have choices when it comes to technology so that people are able to find what works best for them, which you have done. Well done, Amin. Thank you so, so much. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker. And all the way from, this is our first speaker from the US. And so thank you so much for joining us. And I'm thrilled to welcome Corinna Cornejo to there she is, to our screen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are. Hello, how are you, Corinna?
Good, thanks. It's morning here, although morning on the other side of the date line from you.
Wonderful. Well, good morning to you at what I'm sure is a far more civilized time of morning, however. Now, one of the, we really did want to present lots of different examples and experiences. And thank you so much for joining us and providing us with the type 2 diabetes experience. And we know that sometimes it is quite difficult to find people who perhaps would like to share their experiences. So thank you so much for coming on. And you're going to be talking with us about data and how you use it as a person living with type 2 diabetes. So thank you very much, and take it away.
Well, thank you for having me. So I am even more old school than Amin. I use MDI and a cloud-connected glucometer. I am an insulin-using person with type 2. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about not so much technology, but another very old school aspect of treating your diabetes and getting access to the technology that, the right technology for you in the right time. And that's more about, the relationship you need to have or build with your primary care physicians. So, a little bit about me. My name is Corinna Cornejo, and you might know me online as Type 2 Musings. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes a dozen years ago. So I think I've developed a little bit of perspective, hopefully. Not just older, but also wiser. When I was diagnosed, my A1C was above 13. That converts roughly to a little over 18 mmol per liters. And I was too ignorant about diabetes to understand how serious that was. But thankfully, my doctor at the time was not. And over the next 18 months, I managed to cut my A1C pretty much in half. And I did that using a simple, unconnected, but very accurate glucometer and an app for logging. I also did start taking some medication and changed lifestyle habits. But, I look at myself as proof of you can manage diabetes well, you can make improvements, you can have, progress in your health without using a lot of technology or a lot of sophisticated technology. And, over the years, I've used some different things. I've used CGMs, I've used connected devices, I've used fitness trackers to help me manage diabetes. And at different times, they've been helpful in different ways. But right now, my current setup is very, very simple. I use a connected glucometer that I share data with my physician. I also have a fitness tracker that keeps track of my steps, and I have an app for logging. So, very, very, very simple, but it works for me. And I think, that's, the broad brush of my experience. Looking back, I just want to share a few observations. And the big thing for me with connected care and devices is that I do think that it presents an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you and your provider to get more data and information, but more importantly, to gain insight into how your diabetes is going. I look at my glucose readings, and I can get a sense of where my numbers are at in between labs. I can get alerts in the moment when my glucose goes too low or too high. And I have to say that, after bringing my A1C down so dramatically in that first year and a half, I really did feel confident about my ability to manage my diabetes. And I felt like I could trust my own judgment. And that, I think, has served me really well. It's the kind of experience that I sort of wish on everybody when they're first dealing with diabetes. If you can get big wins and build your confidence and trust that you know what you're doing, or if you feel confident enough to ask the questions you need and look for the help you need, and get it, I think that in the long run serves people so much better than saying, here's the new shiny device and it'll solve all your problems for you. Because as we've heard, sometimes it doesn't. The downside about being connected and sharing data is that it can feel really intrusive. It can feel like, somebody's looking over your shoulder all the time. And it can feel like you might be judged about what did or didn't happen or how you responded. And I've experienced this recently. I went through a period where I was making some changes to my medications and my glucose levels got more volatile, and I was experiencing hypos. And because it was a connected device, my doctor knew, and I would get a call after I had a hypo from a nurse, actually a pharmacist, kind of checking in and asking me what happened and how I responded and how I felt about it and how, what I thought was causing it. And that was great. The first couple of times it happened. But, after it became a regular thing, I started to dread my phone ringing. And I knew the number from the caller ID, and it was just like, am I going to answer it or send it to voicemail? And I found myself sending it to voicemail probably more than was helpful. But in the end, in the moment I was feeling like I was playing a game called Defend Your Life. But, over the course of those calls and conversations, it became clear to me that it wasn't an isolated happening. And even though I was focused on what had happened that particular day, that at one point they pointed out to me that I had gone low 4 times in 2 weeks. And I wasn't aware of that. I hadn't looked back. So that was very helpful. It gave me a new insight into, okay, something else is going on here and I need to pay attention in a different way. So, it's 2 sides of the same coin, and you have to find a way to, I think, get more of the positive and helpful and less of the intrusive and annoying. And I think, one of the biggest things, most important things you can do is in diabetes care, period, but also when it comes to making decisions about what kind of connected care and devices to use, is build a relationship with your provider. You want to be seen as an individual. You don't want to be seen as a set of lab tests and a list of ailments. And there is, I have found that with some providers, I've sort of had to prove myself that I know what I'm talking about, or that I have, and I have a legitimate reason for wanting particular devices or wanting to use particular approaches to managing my diabetes. And that can feel like, it should be that way. But on the other hand, I kind of understand it. They want to make sure that what I'm doing, I'm still safe. There are limitations in terms of insurance, and there's limitations in terms of just the resources and the money I have available to manage my health. So all of that goes into it. But I think building a relationship understanding that that's going to change over time. Sometimes the relationship is not good and it's time to change providers or make changes to your care in other ways. All of that is part of managing diabetes overall, managing your health overall, and working with connected health and connected devices. You know, I think about where I was at when I was first diagnosed and where I'm now, and really the things that I'm looking for from my care provider and connected care and any devices that I use are really quite different. And it goes back to that idea that Andrea shared earlier about, you know, the right tech at the right time, you know, the right tech for you. That that's going to, you know, as time goes on, as your health changes, as you know, things become more or less available, all of that is going to influence what you know, what you want and what you need and what's available to you. You know, the bottom line, do I always get what I want? Nah, you know, life doesn't work that way. It would be great if it did. But you know, I realize that that's the case. And I do realize that, you know, I'm dependent on my provider for anything that requires a prescription. So I can't just go to the pharmacist or the pharmacy and, you know, get this or that and be on my merry way. So they play a role in my access and my ability to use and the support and education I get for any device that I'm going to use. And you know, this one of the sticking points is I also realize that if I've got a connected device, my provider is most likely going to want to see my data, and you know, that's something to think about. How do you feel about that? What are you willing to share automatically, and what are you not comfortable just having, you know, sent off automatically for them to see and you know, make judgments about or monitor without the ability to, you know, give the backstory or provide some context to what they're seeing, or you know, asking a question about what you know, asking a question that would help you understand better what's going on. So that's, you know, that's a big thing to consider. And, you know, depending upon what healthcare situation you're in and what country you're in, I know that people have different rights about how much of their data they can choose to share. But I think also a lot of that is influenced by the personal relationship you have with your provider. And if there's a trust and an understanding and a mutual respect there, I think that leads to more flexibility in terms of individualizing, you know, what data you share and how that data is used, and how that data is used to make decisions about your care going forward.
Corinna, thank you so much. I think that there is so much in there that I want to unpack, and we've had so many comments come in. I know that we're going to flash some up along the bottom there. So yes, people with diabetes are legitimate to ask about treatments that would be better for us. I think that's absolutely true. The thing in there that I really loved, though, was the piece where you were talking about confidence. And I think that that's something that is so important. And I think we might unpack that a little bit more when it comes to our panel discussion. I love that comment from Solo. defend your life, because I think that that's one of the things we certainly want to feel more confident with whatever it is that we're doing. That should actually be definitely very much part, I guess, of the discussion that we have with our healthcare professionals. And this beautiful comment, listening to the perspective of a person with diabetes, it's fascinating how similar the challenges are for all people with diabetes, yet diverse representation is crucial. Yes, yes, yes. I would like to shout that, but I would wake my family. But thank you so much, Corinna. I can't wait to bring you back on at the end. And look, more comments. This is a great one too. Great to hear from people with type 2 diabetes. Yes, it really is. And I'm very, very grateful to hear your voice and to hear your experiences today. And clearly, so are all the people watching. Thank you very, very, very much. Okay, we have our final speaker now, and I feel like Dana Lewis doesn't really need all that much introduction, but I will just say a few words about her as she comes on screen now. Dana has been a force and is an absolute force in the diabetes community, especially, well, across everything, but especially when it comes to open source technology. She is a pioneer. She's incredibly generous in the way that she shares all that she knows. And you know what? She ran something like 82 miles just a few days ago. So I don't even know how she is standing, let alone about to do a presentation. Dana, thank you so much for being here. Take it away. And I'm much looking forward to having a chat afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Renza. And the trick is I'm actually sitting. So that makes a big difference in being able to be here today. Thank you so much. I am sharing some slides just because I want to visualize some concepts I have about how I try to make data meaningful. And that includes diabetes data, and it also includes data beyond diabetes, because we have to recognize a really important fact that diabetes is hard. You know, we're told to eat right, exercise, take your medication, but there's no one way to eat. Different food affects us at different times. Exercise makes our blood sugar go up and down at different times. And when we talk about something as insulin doesn't work instantaneously, as we know. So there's dozens of variables and thousands of decisions that go into a single data point, like an A1C. And it can be really disheartening, I think, for a lot of us people with diabetes, or at least I'm speaking of my own experience, of feeling like we are judged or measured by a single point in time measurement. And that's like telling a commercial airline pilot, hey, here's your one score for how everything's gone for 3 months. That just isn't helpful or constructive for figuring out what went well and what we might want to change going forward. And I think the other challenge in diabetes is that accessing our data, diabetes data and other data, is really, really hard. I always share this screenshot from 2013 because this is how I had to share my data with my doctors. And so when my doctor would say, well, why did you go low on April 22nd at 4 p.m.? I'd be like, well, I don't know. You know, this data doesn't have my exercise. Was I working? Was I walking? What my insulin was doing? You know, it's just so not useful, but this is what we had to work with. It was really, really frustrating. And for me, it wasn't until I was able to get real-time cloud access to my glucose data from my CGM and pair it with some of the behavioral data of what I was doing. Was I eating? Was I exercising? Had I been modifying my insulin levels? That allowed me to really better understand all of those variables and putting them together in what's now known as an open source automated insulin delivery system. This closed loop or AID system was amazing because it took my CGM graphs from the up and the downs and the highs and the lows to taking care of most of the burden of that background decision making. And so I would get CGM graphs that looked like the bottom ones, more straight lines with way less work. And because it was solving some of those really weird variances on a day-to-day basis, I came to the realization that for me, data is not just the A1C, and it's not even just the time and range. It's not just about the glycemic output or outcomes, but we can also start to look at the inputs and behaviors of diabetes, and that is data too. So for example, we should be able to have the choices with any technology. I love the conversations we've been having today about individual choice, the right technology at the right time, and recognizing that that can change over time, whether it's on a weekly or monthly basis or seasons of life. I was diagnosed at age 14, And what I needed for my diabetes technology and data has changed as I went to college, as I graduated and moved across the country by myself and lived alone. My needs have changed and my needs for data have changed. And that includes not only that outcome of what is happening to my blood sugars, short-term or long-term, but it's also looking at the behaviors and how much work it takes to manage my diabetes. And so I really want people to start thinking about data, both in terms of the glycemic outcomes. Like, yes, we would like to have an in-target A1C, good time in range, no hypoglycemia, and less hyperglycemia. But what if you could choose on a situational basis whether or not to inject insulin or to bolus manually? What if you could just do a general meal announcement and not have to precisely count carbs? What if you could skip a meal announcement altogether? What if you could eat low carb, high carb, or anything in between? Those are the choices we should be able to have, and we should be able to optimize between what matters to you. You may be looking at this list and thinking, well, I don't actually care about bolusing. That's not hard for me. Or I don't mind carb counting. I'm pretty good at that. Whereas somebody else may find that the fact of looking at a plate of food and seeing math, that may give them diabetes distress or impact their quality of life, and they just don't want to do it. Or maybe they're okay doing it most times, but in other times, like a date, you're going to the prom as a teenager, or you have a business meeting and you're trying to close a business deal and you just don't want to think about diabetes. Those are valid choices. And we want to have the technology and the data to support those choices about what matters to you as a person with diabetes. And one of my favorite illustrations of less work is this image from Solkaharo, who had been tracking the number of manual actions he, his wife, and other caregivers were taking with their son who has type 1 diabetes, and looking at the adoption of technology and how that changed over time. So they had a visual reinforcement of this has been less work. There's been less manual actions for helping their son reach target goal glycemic levels, which I think is so incredible. So we can look at data retrospectively to kind of validate, yes, this is working for me, or this isn't working for me and I want to change something. We can also use our past data to inform the future. We can use tools like what we developed in the open source community. There's something called AutoTune. So you can plug in your past insulin dosing and carb entries and any other changes and generate a report where it can recommend changes to your basal rates, your ISF, your carb ratio. It's not a perfect tool, but it is a tool where a tool did not exist before. And it provides a different way to look at your data in a way that might make it helpful for you or in conversation with your healthcare provider to talk about making changes in the future. And really, that's what data should be doing for us. It should be helping us answer meaningful questions about what is important to us and how do we want to live our lives. There's all kinds of situations that we have on a regular basis as people with diabetes, things like starting a new medication. How do we know it works? A lot of the research studies for medications not for diabetes warn people with diabetes, your blood sugar may go high or low. That's really helpful, right? What do you know to look for? So I actually worked on this paper, the citation's at the bottom. It's an open access paper that specifically looked at blood sugar data and glycemic variability before and after starting a medication. And you can see the difference. The time and range difference was like 2%, 91 to 93%. It's not a big change, but you can see on the bottom, there are way less excursions above the target glucose range. And another way to look at it is like, how often was the blood sugar accelerating? Before the medication is blue, after is red. So you can see those lower levels of red means that there's less of those really steep changes in blood sugar data. So this could be for a new medication. It could be looking at your data for a special event, something that you want to do. If you do want to cross the Sahara or climb a mountain or run, or maybe you just want to jump on the trampoline after dinner, whether you're a kid or you're doing that with your kids, finding ways to pull this data together manually or automating it can make a big difference. And so when we think about data, we may not be tracking all of the data yet. And I think it's important to think about, what do you want to collect and what do you want to influence? You can look at input data, like those manual behaviors, boluses, injections for those on pens and syringes, things like carb announcements or meal announcements, the type or the size of the meal. And then we can look at the outcomes. And I think this is important. So when we talk to our healthcare providers about diabetes stuff, we can say, look, I want to focus on the inputs. I want to limit the work. I want to improve this particular outcome. This is what matters to me. And I think that's the most important conversation we can have around diabetes data is, what is it? Is it income data, input data, outcome data? How does it work for us? And how do we want it to work for us? And there's other data too that we can use. Some of us are privileged to have access to different wearables. And so some of the data I use from different wearables that don't really seem like diabetes data, but I use it in that way. One example is my resting heart rate. If I have high glucose overnight, high for me relative to using an automated insulin delivery system, I have a higher resting heart rate and a different pattern overnight. So I can look at my heart rate graph and know without looking at my CGM that my blood sugar ran slightly high. And I've also been able to use my heart rate data to actually detect that I had changes in my thyroid levels before my lab values, it was time for my yearly lab values. So that was a really helpful piece of data to say, okay, my thyroid levels are changing, not to the point normally what people would notice, but this along with my other symptoms mean it's time to take action. Same thing with heart rate variability, or HRV. It can be an early trend detection of infection, stress, or response to physical activity and recovery, which for me this week is really, really valuable because, as Renza said, coming off an 82-mile run, my body needs a lot of recovery. And so I've been using things like heart rate variability along with autosensitivity, which is a detection of the changes to sensitivity in my blood glucose levels to see how I'm recovering. The first couple of days, my heart rate variability was a little bit low and my sensitivity was a little bit low, which meant that I was more sensitive to insulin. But that shifted. My HRV has returned to normal levels, but now I'm a little bit resistant to insulin because my patterns of activity have so drastically changed. And there's also things like basal body temperature. It's not the most useful thing for everybody, but for those of us who menstruate, some of us have different timing shifts of our body temperature. And so seeing if we're on pattern for us or we have a deviation from what is normal for us can be really, really helpful to see what's going on. And finally, I just want to throw in some examples of how I talk about data with my healthcare providers, both with my diabetes team, but often I have to see doctors who don't know a lot about diabetes. And so I often like to point out that this, whatever we're talking about, is or is not typical for me, especially when we're talking about blood sugar data with providers who don't know me, because it's like an acute thing. I broke my toe, I broke my ankle, whatever reason it is, to be able to say like, look, blood sugar is not my number one priority. Or this shows that something is going on. You know, this is 30 points or 100 points of blood sugar higher for me than normal. And this and other data like my heart rate and heart rate variability suggests that something is going on. And that's something that I actually used with my endocrinologist, who does know me well, again, in that discussion most recently about my thyroid labs and my thyroid data. But I also think it's really, really valuable to know before you go in and to say this as many times as you need to, that the problem I am trying to solve today is blank, and talk about the data in a way that helps you focus on that. And if there's a conversation about data, whether it's blood sugar or not, that starts to not be helpful, to pause and come back to this and say, can we park this for another time? What I'm trying to solve today, what I want to accomplish is this. And then talk about the data that helps you answer those questions or arrive at the conclusion that you need to arrive at by the end of that appointment. So lots and lots of great stuff about diabetes, about data, about technology. And I think the theme of today is really coming back to choice and doing what's right for you and advocating for yourself. That's so important for people with all types of diabetes, regardless of which technology or devices you choose. And I just want to thank everybody for the conversation and for highlighting these things and sharing them with other people with diabetes.
Dana, thank you so, so much. Thank you for these excellent tips. And absolutely, that is what I was thinking. I was frantically taking notes. Somebody said, I can't believe it, Dana is here. You are a bit of a rock star, Dana. I think that there are some people who are very, very excited to hear you, as I am, anytime I get to hear you. And so there are some really great comments here. Yes, I think that this should also be printed on a big poster. Data isn't about just about glycemic outcomes. There is so much more to that when it comes to diabetes. So thank you so, so much. I'm going to let you take a deep breath, just a little one though, because then we're going to bring you back on and aid your recovery. 82 miles. That I don't think I've even driven that far in a day. So, and you ran it. Okay. All right. Now, what we're going to do now, before we have our panel discussion, is we have got a little bit more audience participation that we would like to use again. So please do get out your mobile phones, and we've got a couple of Menti questions. So if we could just bring up, here are our slides. So a reminder again, we need to go to menti.com and then use the code 61131031. It's at the top of that slide if I have said it a little bit too quickly. And we want to know, do you share your diabetes data with your diabetes team or your healthcare professionals? And I know that, I mean, this is probably one of those answers that will change. So for some people right now, it might be absolutely yes. For others, it might be absolutely no, and that might be for now, or it might be forever, and others, it might be sometimes. And I think that this is just another example of showing that what we do with our data has to be individualized. And we're seeing that most people do. That's really super interesting, I think. I'm fascinated by that, but I'm so curious to delve into what's behind it. Why are you doing that, and what are you hoping to get out of it? And I think actually that is going to be part of our next question, which we'll get to in just a second. If anybody else would like to add there. I think there's obviously some real reason why people would share data with your diabetes team and know what you are hoping to get out of it. But let's jump on to the next question, where we are going to actually ask people for some ideas. How does sharing your data impact your conversations with your diabetes team and your healthcare professionals? And my question here, and perhaps you can add this to it, is, do you actually have a choice, or is this something that's just expected? Has it been a conversation about consent around sharing data? And I sometimes wonder if that is a conversation we need to be having a little bit more. This is an open text answer. Please feel free to type in one or more comments in there. It doesn't really, it's just expected. Yeah. I do wonder how many people it's just expected that is part of it. But it doesn't add value. And that's, I think, something that we heard with our speakers, was that, especially Dana there at the end, talking about what it is that we want to get out of when we're sharing data. And so perhaps we can unpack some ways to really highlight that and the conversations that we need to have with healthcare professionals to make sure that it is adding value. Gets us to the point. Absolutely. It's a very good way to start and to direct a conversation. I love this one. It supports my choices. I see that as using data for good. How to manage my diet better? Absolutely. I'm happy that my endo doesn't ask to see the data. I only want to share it if there is a specific reason to. Very much about people with diabetes driving these conversations and doing what they need to. Oh, this one, it doesn't. My doctor looks at it and feels I didn't lie, like with blood glucose logs. That's one of the conversations I have so frequently when I'm doing talks for healthcare professionals, is because I often hear them say, oh, you can't hide anything away. And I kind of think, why would people want to hide anything away unless we feel like we're going to be judged? So perhaps if data was really not seen as a judgment point, perhaps we wouldn't mind sharing everything at all times. Yes, what happened on July 10 at 4 p.m. All right, these are such brilliant answers, and we're going to be able to keep all of these and to be able to have a look at them. And always interesting to be able to group them into themes, because often that is absolutely what we see. There's a lot of recurring themes here from people. It speeds up conversation and makes it easier to answer the usual questions of the team. I think that's actually a really interesting point. Sometimes it can be the thing that it's like, right, let's do this. This is a great conversation starter, but then I really want to be able to get to the points of the things that is important to me to be discussing today. All right. Okay, well, wonderful. And they are the questions that we have. Thank you so much to everybody who has been so open and has shared. I think that that's a really useful way to get conversations started and going. So I am now going to bring everybody back on. And when I say I'm not. We've got an amazing group of people who are making all of this happen behind the scenes. I'm just sitting here talking, which that's what I do. Thank you so much. We've got Amin, Dana, Andrea, Corinna, and Jasmine. Thank you so much for your incredible presentations and for talking so eloquently about your different topics. And I'm thrilled that you're back, and we've got some questions. And, you know, the one that I'm actually going to start with, there really were just so many, but there was one in particular that I wanted to start with. And it was a question about, I think this was during your talk, Corinna, and this is an interesting perspective and important discussion regarding the stigma and shame we face when others see our blood glucose numbers. There is the question up there. And I think this is a really interesting one that I wanted to touch on, is about, we have all this great information at our hands, and I think that hopefully we're working really, really hard to understand that data is just information for us to act. But sometimes then there's the other people and what they think. So it might be, you know, other people might be health professionals. It could be family if we share information. And I'm curious to know how we deal with that. So quite unfairly, but just because I just looked at you right then, Andrea, I'm going to jump to you about that and ask if this is something that you actually have considered and it's been an issue that you have thought about.
I'm sorry, I had a bit of a technical issue and I didn't hear the question. It jumped, my sound jumped for just a minute there.
The question was around, the point was around sharing when other people judge your glucose data. So, you know, I said that that we hope that we're starting to understand that data is just an information point that we can then do something with. But how do we deal with, there's a question, it's just gone back up. What about when others see it and we perhaps face some stigma and shame if others see it and then comment perhaps negatively about our data?
I think it's a really, really important point. And I personally have been very lucky, maybe because I don't share my data with anybody, including my healthcare professionals. Like, I mean, occasionally a number here, a number there, or, you know, I want to troubleshoot one thing, but it's really specific. So I haven't dealt with a lot of personal stigma, but I've had it from myself. I've sort of had that self-judgment of, or thinking that my meter is judging me. I don't want to see that number, and so I'm not going to check my blood sugar level. And I think my way of getting out of that was really to reinforce for myself, and using the help of other people in the diabetes online community, of the fact that those numbers they're just numbers. There is no judgment attached to them. It's just an information, or a number that can give you information to make a decision or not, depending on what the situation is. And I believed that so much, and I needed that reinforcement so much that at one point on my insulin pump, where I was supposed to have my name, sort of as I logged into my insulin pump, I know what my first name is. I don't need that. And I put that, it's just a number, to reinforce that every time I turn that on and I'm going to see that number, that it's not something that's judging me. It's just information that I'm going to be able to do something with.
Yeah, I love that. I think that any reminder that we have about it's just a number is really important. I mean, I'm going to jump to you and ask you about that, and ask if it's been something that you've had to deal with, and how you do that. And I always think, you know, I mean, there are moments where we make a deliberate decision to share, but, you know, there are always those moments where, you know, you've done a blood glucose check, or you've looked at your CGM, and somebody perhaps has noticed over your shoulder what your number is, and they're like, oh, is that bad? Or, oh, yes, that is bad. And if that's happened, and how you deal with that.
I think it really depends on the situation. So if it's someone who does it really out of curiosity, then I would explain to them what happened. So I don't know, I had a high carb meal and I didn't estimate it properly, and I would just go through the whole thing with them. But if I know if it's just out of, if it's a judgmental, then it's very simple. I just say, walk in my shoes. Walk in my shoes, then judge me. Because it's crazy. Sometimes you eat the same thing, you did the same thing, you inject the same amount of insulin, and it just goes crazy. And I feel like this equation of carbs, physical activity, insulin, and stress only, no, that's not the equation. There are another 150 other hidden factors. So I feel like using a CGM helped me a lot, and wearables helped me a lot to understand that, and I hope others would as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like we have a little bit of a push-pull here. We've got the, technology is amazing and it's really great. And then there is the burden that does impact my mental health. And of course, that burden is going to be different for everybody, and it's not static either. It changes. But I wonder how we can have conversations around that, because I know certainly for me that has never been a conversation that, it was always just very much the tech is brilliant. It is really great. It's going to change your life. And then when I realized that there were moments where it did make me feel really overwhelmed, I thought that was just me. And I thought that clearly I'm not knowing what to do here properly. Then obviously I spoke with other people and I learned that it wasn't just me. But I'm wondering, Jasmine, I might throw this to you and just ask, how is it that we can really, there's great evidence to support this. So how can we have these conversations, I wonder, to make it so that people don't feel that they're the ones who are failing if they are feeling very overwhelmed with wearing the technology, the data that the technology is spitting out constantly, or just everything to do with the tech?
I think I'll answer that with two of your favorite things: language matters and peer support. So previously when people were talking about the stigma they were faced for glucose levels, I think it's really important that we're choosing respectful language when talking about glucose levels. So not bad or good or getting a scorecard, as we might have seen on Twitter, people getting an A+ for their glucose levels. All those approaches are really shaming and blaming and not helpful. So making it, and it's also not specific. When you're saying it's something good or bad, it's not telling you where it is or where you want it to be or how you want it to be. And then secondly, like you said, you felt alone until you talked to someone else who had that experience. And I think that really speaks to how important peer support is in this community, and every community. I benefit from peer support too, that when you can meet with other people with diabetes and you can talk to them about your experiences, you can see and understand that you're not alone. Yeah. So I think healthcare professionals should be using respectful language, and there's language position statements out there. For example, Diabetes Australia has one. And also supporting and recommending peer support to people with diabetes.
Wonderful.
Renza, if I can jump in here.
Yes.
I think also we, the diabetes online community, especially people who are in influential positions, really need to be mindful about what we share and how we share it. Yeah. There's a lot of posts that are, oh, I've got the latest and the greatest. Isn't it shiny? Isn't it beautiful? Thank you to, fill in the manufacturer, for this. And it creates a lot of not just fear of missing out, but also resentment among people who know that they won't have access to that that's not an option for them. And it's not just around devices, it's also around, people sharing those beautiful horizontal straight lines along their CGM screens. And because when you do that, a lot of times it comes across as you're holding it up as an example of this is what everyone not just should aspire to, but what everyone should be able to achieve. And look at all these great tools we have at our disposal. Why can't it can hit as, why can't you do that?
Yeah,
and not why can't you do it because of structural issues, but because it's a personal failing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that, I very much believe that people should share and feel comfortable doing, whatever they do feel comfortable with. But being mindful, I think, that of others and how that can be interpreted is really critical. There was a comment that just went up that was self-judgment is the worst. Oh my goodness. I feel like that is absolutely so, so true. Dana, I feel when I hear you speak, because you have these brilliant tips and tricks of how to really focus everything back onto, making sure that you're getting what you need. But self-judgment, how do we cope with that? How do we manage that? Is there a way to banish it forever? Please say yes and tell us what the answer is.
I think the challenge I often have is that comparison with other people. This is true with running. This is true with diabetes, and the choices people make around their phone, their pump versus their MDI, which pins they use, syringes or not. I'm one of those people who've never injected with an insulin pen. I started with syringes in 2002, and I've never bothered to get pins because I use vials to fill my pumps. And so it's just easy to do syringes. And so I'm like probably a unicorn. I've never used an insulin pen. So I look at that and I'm like, people are judging me as being like this really weird person. And it's just like, it's a convenience thing. My situation was, it was just convenient for me. Syringes are more convenient than dealing with pen refills and keeping that prescription up to date. So I think like there's the self-judgment, but also kind of like projecting what we think other people are thinking on us. So I absolutely do not have answers for everybody, but the way I try to deal with this is to think about what's important to me right now. And in the moment or today and next week, that could be different than in a month or 5 years forward or 5 years back, and recognizing that's going to change and trying to give myself the grace to go with the flow. And so there are absolutely days where I'm like, diabetes is not my priority. I'm going to keep my devices going. I'm going to keep myself alive, but I'm going to change my CGM alarms, or I'm going to tell the people who follow me with glucose data to change their follow alarms, and ask them to only talk to me about diabetes if these certain conditions are met. And the other thing that I found really helpful, kind of related back to this discussion of people looking at your data, is sometimes I just need to vent and be like, I don't feel good because all this stuff happened and I cannot change the past. I know what to do differently going forward. I'm just venting. And distinguishing that from when you're asking other people for help. And you can be like, hey, I just want to vent. So please don't start giving me suggestions about how I could have done things differently an hour ago. That doesn't really change anything. But there's other times where I'm like, I'm stuck and I'm not seeing the pattern. Other eyes would be helpful. Can you walk this through with me and discuss this with me? So sometimes with your loved ones or the people around you, that can be really helpful to help take a step back. So you're not so like deep in your own data and your own experience, and you can have somebody to maybe brainstorm with you, and it often becomes a non-judgmental thing, and it becomes very, very constructive. So I found for me sometimes that is beneficial, not always, but in those dialogues with people, I try to distinguish between I'm venting and complaining, or, I do want to have a constructive discussion. Like, can we step back and have that together in a non-judgmental, shaming way? And that's been really helpful for me.
Yeah. Dana, I'm going to keep you there because we've got a question specifically for you. Amin, jump in first, though.
Really quickly. So something Dana said, and also something Corinna said so beautifully about the confidence. And also it's probably related to the self-judgment commentary as well. So I feel like you have a couple of years, and then you're just, the first few years with diabetes, you're just lost. It's chaos. It's lost. You're lost, or maybe it's the other way around. The first couple of years, you still have, I don't know, things are still under control, and then they're a bit chaotic. And then there is a point when you, or I hope everyone reaches that, but there's a point for me where I felt the confidence of sometimes pushing back, also in conversations with my HCP, pushing back with other peers, or just walking away. And that confidence is extremely important. I don't know when it exactly happened, but I know exactly what helped me gain this confidence, and it's definitely peer support. So the first time I attended a group of diabetes community in Berlin almost 7 years ago, they all got their pens out and injected in public, and they got their test strips out and measured their blood glucose in public. And I go, whoa, you guys do this in public? You don't go to the bathroom? So that was one moment. And then there's the moment when Steffi told me to just leave the doctor I was going to and just change the doctor. And I go, of course, I can do that. And so, yes, the confidence thing is extremely important. Exactly what Dana, Corinna, and everyone else said.
Yeah, and I feel like that's not something that is taught as part of diabetes education necessarily. That's something, though, that is taught not, as a teaching. It just sort of happens when you're here listening and working with other people, and how lucky we are that we have friends like Steffi who can be lovely and bolshy and make sure that we understand that. But I'm going to jump back to you, Dana. We had a question that was directed to you, but then I am going to ask probably everybody else or a few other people. So with technology progressing, the data we have now is increasing exponentially. How do we as individuals traverse through so much data point without getting overwhelmed? And I know you've sort of touched on that, bringing things into what's important to us. But how do you talk about this? Because I know that this is something that people are talking about all the time, and I'm curious to know how you and the beautiful way that you simplify things, how you would address this.
So one of the things I did early on was create a really simple web page that did time and range on a 24-hour rolling basis, 7 days, and 30 days. Because I wanted to juxtapose that against the 3-month A1C that I felt like I was being benchmarked against. And it was really, really helpful because I could see how one day absolutely did not tank my 30-day number, let alone my 90-day. And it really helped me separate one day or one moment or like a bad patch with a bad site and sensor and a couple of hours where things were just rubbish, and did I wait an hour before I went to change my pump site? Like right now I have a really jumpy sensor. I'm going to change it after this, but I waited until this was over. So I had data during this, and that's not going to tank my A1C, my time and range, anything else. And so being able to find those viewpoints into your data, is it an auto tune report? Is it looking at time and range at a certain time scale that is helpful to you? Could be not looking at diabetes data for a while and focusing on tracking things that, how did I feel today? I'm here, I'm present, I ticked on a sticky note. That's what's meaningful for me. So I think, again, no perfect answer, but I think we don't have to look at every single raw data point. We can look at aggregates. We can look at different slices of data, different time points, and also absolutely non-diabetes metrics can be as meaningful as the blood sugar data points. So that's kind of the way I think about it. And I'd be curious how everybody else deals with this as well.
Yeah, I love that. Andrew, have you got anything to add? I know that I love that, other metrics. When I sleep well, it's a good day. It's starting well. Yeah. Andrea, what have you got there to contribute?
I probably have kept some old habits from when the technology was not quite so advanced, in that I very quickly, after diagnosis, stopped writing down in a logbook all of my blood sugar data points. But I would do it for myself from time to time. Things seem to be getting a little bit wonky. For the next week, I'm going to write stuff down, and then I'm going to have something to be able to analyze and make some decisions on. And I do the same today, even though I have constant CGM readings and everything. I don't look at my metrics every day. Just an example from a couple of weeks ago when I was not doing well, it's kind of in life in general, sort of on the edge of burnout and all sorts of things. And I knew that, diabetes was following the rest of it. I wasn't paying attention. It was doing what it was doing. So I did open up my reports and looked at my AGP graph and looked at my time and range and stuff like that. And it goes back to what Dana was saying as well, that, okay, it allowed me first to see that it wasn't as bad as I felt it was. So my own how I was feeling in that moment was also influencing how I thought my diabetes was doing. But also it put it into perspective of what was going on in the last week, the last month, the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And that was really helpful. So I've kind of kept that I don't need to be focused on it all the time. But there are times when I do need to focus on it, and that's when I choose to do it and make decisions or not based on whatever situation it is.
And I wonder if there's small other tricks. They're not super common, but you hear about people putting their phones into grayscale, black and white, to remove the colors of the app icons. Try that with your diabetes software, your reports. Like if the green, yellow, red, or whatever color combination they're using, like give you bad vibes and it makes you like feel icky to look at it, try turning the color off, try printing it out in black and white. See if that makes a difference. Maybe it won't, but sometimes little design things like that, like they're just not working for me in my mindset right now. And so small changes like that, I don't know that they would help a lot of people, but it might be something to try. If you can't necessarily design your own data view, then try modifying the one that you have, or think about, is there other ways to get that data?
That's an incredible tip. I wish, and that's one of the things I wish, that we could customize everything to be, you know, the way
Make
that we
everything
want
purple.
to. You know, yeah, have it all. I'd have it pink stripes. Now, here's a comment that I love, and I want to sort of unpack this a little bit. But lots of comments talking about how we do need to zoom out and not just focus on too much of the detail. I think a bit of a disconnect is necessary for mental health. Thank you so much for this comment. And I'm going to say that that's a disconnect, just not only necessarily from our diabetes data. If we're feeling a little bit overwhelmed from, you know, if I think the diabetes community is incredible and peer support is amazing, but if, you know, you are seeing things there that are making you sort of feel a little bit anxious, maybe don't log onto Twitter quite so much or whatever it is that you're using. But Corinna, I wanted to ask you about this, you know, disconnecting for mental health, you know, whatever that disconnect might be. It might be, you know, stepping away from discussing diabetes with others or whatever it might be. How do you feel about that?
I think that is very important to do. And I think people are afraid to do it, partially because of what Dana was talking about. We're not shown, and we often don't realize, that no single number is going to kill us, or kill our numbers. And I'm older than all of you, so I'll pull the grandma card and say, you know, as you get older, you get some perspective about what was like big and bright and in your face when you're in your 20s. By the time you get to 50 or 60, do you even remember it? And so, yeah, step away, focus on something else, enjoy some other aspect of life for a while, and then come back to it.
Yeah. I love this comment. I mean, I'm coming to you in just a sec because I can see that you've got something to say, but how much is quality of life suffering to obtain the ideal A1C or time in range, whatever it is? I've told my endo that I'm okay with a 6.7 or 7 for my mental health. And yay for you knowing what it is that is going to make you feel comfortable and confident and being able to have that conversation with your endo. Amin, tell us what you're thinking.
Yes, so really briefly about the topic of disconnecting, I raved about how much I loved having a CGM, but there's also the other side of it. So the CGM I'm using now, I use the app for it. So if I need to use it, it has to be there all the time. That includes going on walks, going to bed. I used to leave my phone in another room before going to bed until I got the CGM app on it. And now I cannot leave my phone behind anywhere. And that's a real problem. That's a real problem for me. So I don't know. I hope they can change that. So that's I guess the point I'm making is with all these connected things, they're converging to the phone. So even if you're okay not disconnecting from the diabetes tech and you want to disconnect from the rest of the tech, it makes it really hard. So I really wish they can be mindful of that as well. Okay, of course I could use a receiver. I probably should use a receiver.
Well, I would say, you know, having a phone nearby and letting it capture the data is one thing. Actually looking at the phone or paying attention to it is another. I mean, that's another way to think about separating it. It doesn't, you know, I'm not advocating in any way, you know, pull your CGM off and your pump off and go running naked in nature. Although it might be fun. But there are ways to still be using these things where it's not top of mind. It's not in your face. You're not constantly paying attention to it.
This is absolutely one thing.
You're very wise, Corinna. I couldn't do that. The phone is there. I'm going to scroll.
Dana?
I would love to see the manufacturers of commercial devices recognize that there are times when we will need to change or mitigate. And maybe this is part regulatory, part manufacturers recognizing the ability to change when we need certain types of alarms. I think this comes back to the points you were making. I think it was Andrea early on about like the devices becoming audible and telling other people that you have diabetes in different situations, or there's just times for your mental health where it's just not good. And you want to have the data there for when you need it, but you can use other software with more customizable alarms that better fit the situation. And I would love to see more devices get to the point where you can customize on a kind of like a need to be situation, not a one size fits all. This is your alarms forever. We can change that slightly, but I don't think we can change it enough to match the needs of people with diabetes in the real world. So I want to see us continue to encourage manufacturers and regulators to recognize that need for flexibility. Like, yes, we need some things for safety, but sometimes there's other aspects of safety that are as much or more important in terms of mental health versus like specific glucose levels, especially when you take into account things like noisy sensors.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm going to do a quick whip around and ask you all the same question so much. I'm going to ask you the same question. Somebody just said, thank you so much, Dana, for these tips helping us to advocate for ourselves. They are great tips. So I'm going to ask you all one question, and it's going to be your final parting words of wisdom when we are talking about making sure that we are absolutely getting the most out of our technology and our data, and any advice that you might have for people of how to manage that. Corinna, you've already said, you can take off everything and run naked into the woods, which seems like great advice and probably what we should just leave things on. But I'm going to start with you. What other sort of golden nugget would you like to share as your parting words?
You can always say no.
Oh, love it. Yes.
You have a choice, and the choice doesn't have to be yes. It can be no, or it can be not right now, or it can be later, or maybe a little bit, or I'm going to dive deep.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's awesome. Jasmine.
I really liked Christy's comment before about talking about the timing range that she felt was A1C or timing range that she felt was best for her mental health. And so I think my golden nugget of wisdom has been stolen from someone else. Camille, also known as Nerdabetic on Twitter, he talks about the concept of time in happiness. And I think that's really important to consider too, having that grace and that compassion for yourself, taking things slowly, one step at a time. If you have a bad day or a bad morning, it's okay, leave it in the past and think about how much time you want to be spending in happiness too. Your mental health, your quality of life, those things are really important.
I love that. Thank you so much. And that is a great thing to remember. And thanks to Camille for that wonderful idea. Andrea.
Well, so my top two were choice and time and happiness. But I think what's really important is being able to find find answers, to find support, to find sort of ways to be able to work within the constraints that you have. And so you've chosen to use something, it's going to be beneficial in some ways, it's going to be difficult in other ways, and so find ways to work around those difficulties. And the DOC can be very helpful in that, finding
Wonderful.
your tribe.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Amin?
We're talking about connected stuff here, so I would like to stress that we should really try and connect with other people, with peers, with people who live with us like us. Forget the devices. We'll get devices. Maybe we'll get some devices that are connected or not, or HCPs that are tech savvy, or data, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's really about finding someone who's out there who walks in your shoes and gets what you say and can help you go through it. And in the end, it's going to be fine.
Absolutely. And I think that finding those connections with people helps us work out how to use the connected data in a way that and devices in a way that works for us. And Jana, you get the last word here.
If I had to pick one word, it would be respect. Respect for yourself. You know you best and what you need, and that can change over time. And those choices can change. And we should celebrate the fact that we do have more choices now in terms of technology, the ability to switch on and off things. And so a choice you make now is not the choice you make forever, right? You can choose to disconnect for a day, for a week, to run in the field, to not run in the field, or to really to do what Andrea did and come back and say, for a week, I'm going to focus. Like, we have those choices, but I would say respect yourself first and foremost. And of course, respect our peers. And recognize that what works for us doesn't necessarily work for everybody else, and that's absolutely okay. But start with that respect for yourself, and you're doing a great job.
Wonderful. Such amazing words of wisdom from everybody. I get to now wrap up and say thank you so much to the 5 of you for being just so generous with your time and with your advice and sharing so much. Thank you. I, of course, learnt a heap. Thank you to everybody who's watching and who shared comments and asked questions and engaged. And I love the conversations that are going on when dedoc has these sorts of community events. You know, this is peer support. This is a great opportunity to connect with other people with diabetes, and that's always just something that is so valuable. A huge thank you also to our sponsor, Lily, for helping us to bring this to you. And I think one of the things that I've so loved with this is that we have been able to talk about the things that perhaps don't necessarily get spoken about when we're talking about technology and we're talking about data. We've been really talking about quality of life, because I think for us people with diabetes, that's what this is so often about, is that we really want to reduce the burden as much as possible of living with diabetes. So thank you so much to everybody. This isn't it from dedoc. We always have so much more on the agenda, and I think we have a slide coming up that's going to be showing what's coming up and save the dates. So our dedoc Voices program, which is absolutely incredible. It's a scholarship program whereby people are able to attend professional conferences. And our next round of applications, which is for ATTD in 2023, February next year, will be open on the 1st of November. And if you go to dedoc.org /voices, you will be able to see lots of details around it, and applications will open on the 1st of November. Lots of details about how to apply, and if you search dedoc on any socials, you will get great information from people who have been voices in the past, and just what they've received out of attending one of these conferences and being part of the network as well. And also World Diabetes Day, of course, is on the 14th of November, and there will be another Doc Day. And so please do come along to that, and all the details are at dedoc.org World Diabetes Day. So they're just a couple of the things that we have got coming up. Save those dates, pop them in your diaries, and very much looking forward to seeing you all then. But I think that's probably everything that we've really wanted to cover today. Thank you again to everybody. It's just been an absolute delight to be here and to actually be hearing and learning from our peers. As Amin said, I think that was a great piece of advice from him, is to connect with others living with diabetes and to learn from them and to listen to them and to understand. Technology is truly amazing when it comes to managing our diabetes, whatever that technology is. We are so fortunate that we are not sharpening needles and boiling syringes anymore, but we've got to find a way to make things work for us in a way that really helps us. So thank you very much. I think we can end the show now, and please do remember that you will be able to continue to watch this. This will be available on our YouTube channel, on our Facebook page, on our website, and please do share it with anybody who perhaps has missed it. You can go back and watch it again as well, of course, and keep the conversation going. If you use the dedoc hashtag on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, I believe on TikTok, but as I keep saying, I'm too old to use that. But whatever, keep the conversation going. Find other people who are a part of the dedoc community, the dedoc Voices, and our broader community as well, and connect. It is an incredibly, wonderful place to be. It is all about, global connections. So do take advantage of it. Thank you very much. Oh, before I go, one last final thing. A massive thank you to the dedoc team who have been behind the scenes making all of this happen in an incredibly smooth way. I just get to hear talk, and they are doing all of this stuff behind the scenes. So thank you so much to all of them for doing that. Thank you very much.